This is Qorvex,
Oh, hi, Mark.
and let's say he is quite something else. What's good, folks? It's Nightmare Frame here with a new Warframe video, coming at you with a look at the latest addition to the Warframe lineup. Qorvex, the radiator frame. Yes, he looks like a radiator. This Warframe is a mixed bag and can really be hit or miss with a lot of players. And that's because his kit synergizes really well, but at the same time, it doesn't. And this will make more sense as we get further into this video. He can be played two ways, as an ability DPS Warframe or a weapon specialist, meaning a vessel to make single target weapons shine. The great thing about Qorvex is that you can easily build him without Prime Shred or Primed Surefooted. Look at that! People without time machines can rejoice. And with the addition of this frame, it's the final nail in the coffin to make Oberon even more irrelevant. I'm sure they'll do something about Oberon, right? Right?
Tell Pablo to buff Oberon? Nah.
So, let's take a look at his kit. He is currently the Warframe with the highest armor in the game, at a whopping 875, which beats Valkyr Prime. 700 health and 300 shields, so he is quite tanky. And I'm going to work with that. His passive just flat out gives his weapons 3 meters of punch through, which is a boon to all single target weapons. And Qorvex does have an ability to line up enemies to make use of this passive. I mean, look at that. So weapons with innate punch through get an additional 3 meters on top of that. His first ability, Chunkla Pillars. That's exactly how I pronounce it, trust me, I know. He summons a maximum of 2 pillars that pulsate and deal radiation damage over time, and proc the radiation status effect. The pulse intervals of the pillars are sped up when you use his second and fourth ability alongside it. Interestingly enough, this is the only ability in his kit that is affected by duration. This ability will only affect enemies within the radius of the pillars, but unfortunately the range of these pillars aren't that great. And it has a 35% slow effect that doesn't scale with anything, kinda making this ability not worth it on his kit, but maybe on other Warframes, since it's his Helminth ability. And there's also some counterintuitive play with these pillars. They force you to be in that area to deal damage, because remember, they proc radiation, so if you leave them behind somewhere, they will distract enemies and cause staggered spawns, which forces you to recast them in newer areas every single time. And the animations aren't that great either, which reduces your DPS window quite a bit. So this is the ability you would subsume off if you're going to build him as an ability DPS. Containment Wall. The second ability summons 2 walls that converge towards the center while they drag in enemies and line them up. This ability synergizes really well with his passive for the easy enemy lineup. This ability also triggers a reaction on the first ability, making it pulsate even faster. Unfortunately, adding range does not increase the reach angle, but only the reach length of the walls. But that's not all. These walls also debuff enemies, making them vulnerable to all incoming damage. And if you cast this ability while mid-air, it will immediately ground you, just so you can cast the ability. So be careful where you cast this. Disometric Guard. This ability gives you and allies status prevention. The best part is, it doesn't scale with range, but affinity radius. Yeah, Oberon players, look at that. I mean, who am I talking to? It's just that one person. So this ability gives you a set amount of charges that will prevent status effects, and these charges are consumed each time they prevent a status effect. The amount of charges scales with strength, so think of this ability like a mix of Mesmer Skin and Baruch's daggers, but without the damage reduction or damage immunity. However, you can refresh these stacks if you get assists or kills on enemies affected by the radiation status effect. And guess what? His whole kit is about radiation. And the best part is that violence cannot deactivate this ability. His final ability, Crucible Blast, the Iron Man chest beam ability. This ability locks Qorvex into one spot and has him shoot a beam out of his chest and deal radiation damage per second. While shooting, he is completely immune to all upcoming damage. This ability synergizes with the radiation status effect, so enemies affected by radiation will have them emit a mini explosion. And this can cause a chain reaction because the ability can also proc radiation. And this is a guaranteed proc, by the way. But if enemies are already affected by radiation, this chain reaction explosion can kill even faster, essentially giving you a head start in DPS. This Warframe does have a few issues though. One being his animations are quite exaggerated and robust. I mean, it fits the theme, but it slows him down. So he needs the casting speed to feel smooth, because casting any of his abilities will lock him in place. Being locked in place makes his fourth ability awkward to use in certain tile sets, as aiming his beam can be hard. Not because you're a Warframe player, because of random obstacles, and it has weird hitboxes. The good thing is that you can deactivate the ability to reposition yourself. His abilities are also quite expensive to cast, so you gotta either have ways to regen energy or run efficiency with energy regen tools. But I have found ways to counteract all of his shortcomings, with new items and some interesting synergies. Without further ado, let's take a look at how I've built him and the requirements for the build. I'm using 2 yellow Archon Shards for the casting speed, and if you do get your hands on the Topaz Shards, the orange ones by the way, you can use those final 3 slots for even more damage with his abilities. For the Arcanes, I'm using Molt Augmented for 60% additional strength at max stacks to further boost my abilities, and Arcane Guardian for the 900 bonus armor when I take damage, pairing well with that 875 base armor of his. And for the focus school, I'm running Matarai for Sling Strength, where I get 40% additional strength for 20 seconds after 2 Void Slings, and Power Transfer for another 50% casting speed after a transference. For the first build, I'm using Ensnare as my Helminth ability. This is a more consistent grouping ability, and on top of that, it's recastable. And what makes it even better is that it can synergize with Magus Anomaly and Exodia Hunt. And with this grouping, it just increases his kills per minute to the next level, because it's a lot more consistent than his second ability. But I'm still using the second ability as a debuffing tool, and for a nice little clump. Alright. Let's take a look at the build. In the aura, I have Corrosive Projection for the negative 18% armor to all enemies, strength at 194% with Power Drift, Transient Fortitude, and Augur Secrets. But have a look over here, Precision Intensify. This gives you 90% strength to your fourth ability. The downside is you can't have this alongside Intensify or Umbral Intensify. So close to being a powerhouse. For my energy economy, I have Prime Flow and Equilibrium, but I will pair these up with other things. Range at 175% with Archon Stretch and Augur Reach. This is mostly for my fourth ability, Explosion Radius, and my Ensnare, giving it a bit of reach, since Containment Wall and the second ability don't really matter with range. And finally, Adaptation for that juicy damage reduction. But Nightmare, what do you mean? Archon Stretch, his abilities don't do any form of electric. How are you going to proc Archon Stretch? Well, that's simple. Since I will put a grouping ability as my Helminth, I can use a Sentinel that deals electric damage as abilities. And that is the Diriga. I did showcase the synergy with my Nova Inherit build, and it's quite simple. Just make sure your Diriga has the Arc Coil mod, and it will trigger Archon Stretch for you. It's that simple, and it's free additional energy regen. Now for some additional energy gains. And 2 of those are going to be my utility weapons, which are my guns. The first one is the Phantasma. Taking a look at the build. For the Arcane, I have Primary Exhilarate. This Arcane gives me 1.2 energy regen for 10 seconds when I proc the Impact status effect. Now you might be asking, hey Nightmare, how are you proccing Impact? Well, with Phantasma's Alternate Fire, as it has Force Impact procs, and the weapon itself has innate radiation, so we're getting Viral, Heat, Radiation, and Impact. So we're going to be shooting a couple of alternate fires, grouping up enemies with my second ability and my companion to then shoot out my beam. For the second weapon, I'm using the new Grimoire, the Favonius Codex. For those who got that reference, you're a weeb. Taking a look at the build. The main thing you want to have on this tome is Zata's Invocation, because the alternate fire with this weapon will shoot out to this slow-moving projectile that deals AoE damage, and enemies hit by this projectile will stack up this mod up to 10 times for 20 seconds, giving me insane energy regen, which also pairs well with Primary Exhilarate. And the weapon itself is modded for viral and radiation. Fulmination does increase the AoE of this alternate fire from 6 to 8.64 meters. And the excellence, I have Fast Canticle. Killing enemies gives me a shield recharge rate and reduces my shield recharge delay. Now, you don't necessarily have to kill enemies with this weapon. Just switch this weapon, kill enemies while your alternate fire is active, and it triggers this mod, because the killing of enemies also count as assists. But no worries, I'll do a video explaining more about the tome. Now there's an alternate version to this current build, using the same mods, but all I've done is used a regular stretch and changed the Helminth ability and Sentinel. And the Helminth ability in question is Breach Surge, as this synergizes with his kit and increases his KPM to the next level. And depending on the order you cast this ability, you can actually nuke enemies with just the combination of Breach Surge and his second ability. This Helminth also works really well with his fourth ability, as the beams can hit heads for the sparks, and not to mention, the explosions also trigger the surge sparks. And for my companion, I'm using Cordon, which is the Nautilus. And the build is very simple. Just make sure you have Guardian and Cordon, along with Synth Deconstruct and Assault mode, so you can have additional health orb drops, which synergizes with Equilibrium. And for its weapon, I am using the Hellstrom, which is modded for viral and radiation, yet again, just to have enemies debuffed with viral and radiation. And enemies procced with radiation also is additional survivability, as they're spending more time attacking their allies instead of me. And if you're going to build him as a weapon platform, all you have to do is, of course, replace the fourth ability for like Roar or Eclipse, not use that much range because, well, his second ability isn't that great with range, and the third ability doesn't even care about range. So you're going to be left with your first ability, which I wouldn't recommend using that much. So as the weapon platformer, you're just going to be using 3 abilities. But yeah, these are my different Qorvex loadouts, and I can say he's quite an interesting Warframe, but not a top tier Warframe. He's an interesting frame to bring out once in a while, but not a frame that's going to be meta defining or changing anything in Warframe gameplay. Alright folks, that has been it from me. I do hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. And if you did, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe. For more Warframe content, streams, and so much more, do refer to the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, peace. Bye-bye now.